flying fuck would we do without the internet, man? How on earth would we know a group, a band, a weird, strange, musical enigma like Death Grips without the fucking internet? What in the flying fuck would we do? We can critique and moan about the internet and social media all day long, and while some of those critiques and moans may be valid, we certainly would not be looking at the musical landscape the way it currently is right now without the internet. Like, there just wouldn't be acts like this who gain huge cult followings the way that they do. It's an interesting time, it really is. I feel like historically we're going to look back at the 2010s and view this decade as such an interesting time for music, despite the fact that there's so many naysayers who think that music today is all shit and no one likes music anymore and all that kind of crap. And for me and many other people, Death Grips have been a really significant part of the 2010s by having such a strong and consistent discography. Yeah, sure, they got a few duds, which I'll get into in this video, obviously, but my god, have they been fucking good. Like, yeah, sure, they're a meme, they fuck around with their fans, all that kind of shit. People think they're just edgy and all the things like that. Yeah, you could label all those things. You could even claim they're overrated. You could say anything about them and I probably wouldn't get angry or mad because I know they're pretty niche and strange. But to be honest, they're fucking good, and that's all I care about. They make good music. And before I get into the ranking, do want to remind you that this is actually Patreon requested worst to best. So if you're interested in looking at my Patreon, whether you are or not, that's up to you. Have a look into it. Maybe consider donating. You get requests like this, videos like this, birth from Patreon. Quite a few have now. So if you're interested, please have a look and consider donating. So what I'm going to be doing is looking at their studio albums, obviously, and also their mixtape Ex-Military, which started it all off. And I think that comes to 8 projects altogether. I'm going to ignore the EPs, although Steroids, the EP, that was a pretty cool EP to be fair. But we're just going to look at the albums. And Ex-Military is essentially an album anyway, because mixtapes, albums, similar, they're kind of similar. So here we go, without further ado, starting at number 8, the bottom of their discography, in my opinion, is... time of the release of Fashion Week, I actually ignored it. I didn't really care to listen to it because it was very much playing into the meme of the Jenny Death When, that whole thing that they threw out there, just trying to get fans super hype, super curious as to when it was actually ever going to come. It took quite a long time. Fans were getting impatient. They threw this out there, every track being like Jenny, spelling out Jenny Death When. It seemed a bit too memey for me. I thought they were just kind of fucking around with fans, didn't really care to check it out. So many years later, I did finally lay my ears on it, and it's actually not very good. In fact, I'd say it's borderline bad. I don't know how Death Grips fans view this really. It never got that much hype because as soon as Jenny Death actually came out to complete the powers that be, it wasn't exactly a talking point for Death Grips anymore. I don't even think this is even in the talking point ever for Death Grips fans really, but it just is really plain. Like, the instrumentals to me are not that exciting at all. I feel like it's trying to be chaotic and all over the place, but it just doesn't have it. And of course we don't have any MC Ride features on this at all. It's all instrumental, and it kind of feels like it's missing a huge part of what Death Grips are. And I'm not against them doing instrumental tracks, but I want it a bit more invigorating than this one. This was definitely the biggest miss in their discography, easily. Because it sounds tight, streaky on the outside. Streaky on the outside. Without a doubt, at number 7, the most controversial placing on the entire thing. This probably won't go down well. I feel as though this would be enough to get people in the comment section shouting at my face. But honestly, Year of the Snitch isn't holding up well for me. In fact, I did review it. I was mildly positive at the time, and shout out to anyone remembering this, but Year of the Snitch was the first review I ever did where I gave actual numbered scores, because before that, I did the convoluted, completely confusing grading system, although shout out to Josh for the pH scale, because the pH scale might have changed the music reviewing game. Bring it back, please, Josh. That aside though, Year of the Snitch itself, because I don't want to beat around the bush and like try and avoid my opinions on this one, it just isn't really a very fluid listen. I think what people loved about this album so much was how all over the place and ridiculous it was, and how chaotic it was, and how just manic it is, which is always what they've done, but they kind of took it to a new level on this album here, which again is what Death Grips fans really loved about it and still love about it. It still gets praised to this day, but for me it just needs a bit more of a polish to it. Like tracks like Little Richard or Linda's In Custody, that track, like they're just not really musically engaging to me. I just can't really latch onto anything. Everything just sounds too all over the place, and I'm just listening to something that is just not really pleasant on the ears, which might be stupid to say about Death Grips, but you know, they can do chaotic while also putting out good tracks, and they're very scarce on this album in my opinion. I don't really enjoy Death Grips' Online much either. I remember it being one of my favourite tracks when it came out, but this album here is really falling apart the more I listen to it as years go on. Don't really dig this at all. In fact, the only track that I really like is Streaky. I think Streaky is fucking great. Don't throw it on the ground. It's got the edginess of everything they usually do, but it also has a structure to it that I can follow and enjoy. I think if you're just wanting chaos, this is the best album for that. This could easily be someone's favourite Death Grips album without a doubt, but for me it falls short and is one of their weaker ones, unfortunately.
I'm not pathetic amnesia. I've been Jimmy Page's castle. I'm off the planet, Echo Astro.
No Love Deep Web is always considered one of the more underrated albums in their discography. Even though people love it, it kind of became a bit overshadowed by The Money Store, for good reason, to be honest. I do think it is significantly worse than The Money Store, but I think actually, to be honest, this is the first album on the list that I do actually enjoy. The previous two, in my opinion, had mad flaws to them, but No Love Deep Web has this really sparse energy to it. The tracks don't quite as like hit you as hard. The instrumentals are very interesting on this one. It's not like manicness completely, you know, it's not completely like pummeling your ears. There's something quite unsettling about this one, which I find really cool. I think what makes it fall lower on the list, and an album that I don't quite love or really love or anything like that, is that it just feels like it's missing something. When you listen to The Money Store, there's so much going on, and there's so much intricacies in the instrumentals that you can't help but just be in awe of what you're listening to, whereas No Love Deep Web is the opposite end of their discography, where you're just kind of waiting for more things to happen. But I think for MC Ride, this might be one of his most present albums. Like I feel like he gets the opportunity to take a shine on some of these tracks, which I think is what, again, people really like about it. But I still think it's good overall, but just not one I really find myself going back to as much as I used to, especially when I was first getting into them as a band. I think since then, they've actually topped it with quite a few releases. Speaking of an album they topped it with, Government Plates. This is underrated as fuck. Why do you all underrate this one? This is really good. Into the top 5 now, and you might be thinking, wow, this really made it above No Love Deep Web, above Year of the Snitch, 2 really celebrated albums in their discography, but I guess there's no point in doing these videos if I don't actually have a unique opinion to offer, really. If I'm just echoing what everyone else is saying, you're probably not going to get a great deal out of this video. But for me, I just really like the wonkiness of this album, the really strange incorporations of like the deconstructed club elements, which I guess weren't really, I guess, you know, that term wasn't as much of a trend in 2013 as it is now, but really when you think back to some of the ideas that they're throwing out there on this album, they're quite ahead of their time in a sense. You could probably say that about many Death Grips albums, but I do feel like this album in particular played with electronics a little bit differently, in a little bit of a weirder way, and it brought out some fantastic tracks, especially like the first leg of the album. I think they're all so good. I think the issue with the album may be just that some of the tracks towards the end, particularly the final track, just underwhelms the album a little bit. But I think this is a really good album, and I much prefer it again to some of the ones I've already mentioned in this video so far, which is strange because not many people would say that. And I'm just wondering why I'm in the minority. Why is this an underrated album in their catalogue? What is it about this one that people don't like as much? Because it's really odd that people think it's like the worst one. I don't get it. It's just one of those things though. We all obviously have our different opinions, but for me, Government Plates is really good. I like this one a lot. And yeah, I think it's probably the first album in this ranking here that I would say I really enjoy it.
What it's like to experience
At number 4 we have the mixtape that started it all. It is again not really technically an album in their discography, but when you think of how significant Ex-Military is, you cannot not miss it. Definitely consisting of some of their best songs ever and their most recognizable songs as well, with tracks like Tachyon, Guillotine, but then you also have the fantastic tracks like Lord of the Game. This album is just stacked, absolutely stacked. I love Lord of the Game. What a great track. What a fucking great track. I want it, I need it, known for it. This album has a ridiculous amount of raw energy to it, like one of the rawest albums of the 2010s overall. I think it just is so like primal and bizarre. The vocal performances that MC Ride puts in on this one are just fucking from the soul. It's incredibly animalistic throughout, and I think the production, yeah, sure, did become a bit more intricate and layered and just more and more intense as time went on, absolutely, but it still remains to be one of their best albums to me because I just think it hits the spot so well. Like the way these tracks are produced are so exciting, and yet while it is a bit more sparse, similarly to like No Love Deep Web, I think it is more impactful in the way that the tracks hit. Now we're entering the top 3 though, and we've got a few big hitters on the way in their catalogue. So what's it gonna be next? The double album, The Powers That Be, which we had the first disc in 2014, the second disc in 2015, coming together as one big double album, which is something that they had never done before up until this point, and it was certainly a long wait for it for fans. As I've already mentioned, the Jenny Death When thing became a huge meme for a while, and with Death Grips just constantly playing by their own rules, not really caring about, you know, record labels or what people think, or, you know, how they release their music, I do feel like it's quite an interesting strategy to have done this type of release. But what makes it even better is that the songs are some of their best to date, because the first disc has the insane Bjork samples all over it, weirdly chopped up vocals from Bjork's music in the album there. That was just ridiculous. Only Death Grips could make this work. Who out there would fucking do this and make it work? But yet they did. And I feel as though it paid off so ridiculously well. And then you've got the second disc, which is completely different. It's completely different. There aren't really any of the ideas that were on the first disc at all on the second disc. And it's like, wow. This disc containing tracks like On GP, which people really consider to be the best ever Death Grip song. I think it's probably because it takes such a different approach for what they've ever done. And it's interesting as well because they've never really went ahead and done another song like this. But I guess, you know, they're not really one to try and repeat the same ideas again and again and again. But I just find it remarkable. I find it remarkable how catchy some of the tracks on here are too, especially on that first disc. But then you've got tracks like Why Bitch Gotta Lie, Why Bitch Gotta Lie, Why Bitch Gotta Lie. But leading into the top 2 though, it does become quite apparent that perhaps the catchier Death Grips are, the more excited I am by their music and the more I enjoy it. Maybe.
Motherfucker, let's do this!
At number 2, the most celebrated Death Grips album ever, considered their best, considered one of the best albums ever. Look, it's achieved all the accolades you can think of. The Money Store, this really put them on the map. Ex-Military, yes, put them on the map, really, but the Money Store, like this, I think was a massive game changer in music. While again, I could repeat this over and over again, they are an incredibly niche musical project that you don't really hear get brought up in real life. You're not going to talk to anyone that you meet about Death Grips usually, but I still think there's a place for an album like this to be labeled a game changer because of what they achieved here. The Money Store is remarkable in music. It really just went ahead and broke boundaries and did things that you really wouldn't tend to expect in music. It's like often when you're listening to an album like this or anything in their catalog, you don't really know what you're listening to. Like some of the ideas, some of the compositions, some of the instruments that are thrown in, like it's just mind-boggling. And it's like, what are they doing? What is this? But yeah, as time's gone on, I think perhaps with their discography changing so much, I view this album differently, and I've realized that it is just incredibly catchy. And the punk energy coming through out of this album is so in your face. There is just such an in your face power to this album. And I say the word punk as well, specifically because I think as time's gone on and the more I've revisited their discography and listened through their music, I've come to realize that they are just such a punk band. Like a lot of the time they get labeled as hip-hop, rap music, but I don't even know if I fully agree with that when people say it. Yeah, sure, you could argue that there's experimental hip-hop there, which there definitely is, absolutely, but when you listen to an album like this is like modern punk. This is the new age of punk to my ears. And again, with how fucking catchy it is, The Fever is so catchy. Hacker, I've seen footage. These are ridiculously catchy songs. I feel kind of bad for people that would just listen to it once or maybe listen to 10 seconds of a song and throw it away, because you sit with this album, you quickly get used to it and you quickly realize the brilliance of what they do. But yeah, this is a great album, obviously, a fantastic album. Easily made it into my top 100 of the 2010s, made it into many people's top 100 of the 2010s, even top 10, top 20, very high on many lists. And yet somehow there is actually one album that I think is better than The Money Store. Bottomless Pit is my number one pick for the best Death Grips album up until this point. They're gonna release more, we know this, but this, to me, as of the current date that we're on of release of this video, this is the best Death Grips album. I could really talk about what they've done up until this point, on and on and on, but I feel like I've done that quite a bit in this video already, and I'm probably echoing the thoughts of many other people who have been following this band for years. But in 2016, they hit a spot which I think managed to combine everything they'd done up until this point, including what they did on The Money Store and the other projects that they put together up until then, and just managed to refine it and make it their sweetest, sugariest, maybe catchiest album to date. And it, to me, ended up being the best one. Kicking off with the ridiculous track, Giving Bad People Good Ideas, which is just a throttling song from start to finish, and then you hit that chorus and it's just so out of place, and yet it fucking works. And then you get Hothead, which is just a mishmash of everything slamming together. But then you've got like tracks like Trash or or any of the other ones. Many tracks here that are just so strangely like ordinary for what they've done. Like these are kind of ordinary, like structured tracks. Ring a Bell, Spikes, Warping, like these tracks are just such earworms. They're such fucking earworms. It's crazy. Like they really found a way to just make a near accessible album. It's definitely the most accessible, I think, and You know, probably would argue that it might not still be for everybody's ears, but again, it's not really ever going to be for everybody. But still, the way that they structured these songs, I just find to be phenomenal. 3 Bedrooms in a Good Neighborhood, definitely one of my favorite Death Grip songs ever. That's such a good track. Top 5 in their discography, I think, as a whole. I really love that track, and I just love the way this album just manages to combine all the intensity, the chaos, just the madness, and just managed to kind of like refine it in a really interesting way. I think this is definitely my favorite of theirs. It's my favorite album of theirs, and I hope it's yours too. I hope it's your favorite in their discography as well. The thing with a group like this, a band like this, you could really find a way to rank every album in a completely different order, and it would still make sense. You know, it would still make sense to have Year of the Snitch at the top if that's your favorite, or even No Love Deep Web, Government Plates, even though it never makes it to anyone's top. You could have The Money Store. It all makes sense, really. But for me, this is my ranking, my own subjective, personal ranking. And I hope you enjoyed watching it. I had fun making the video, and I hope you feel the same way about it too. Let me know your ranking in the comments, that would be great. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, because you will get more videos like this in the future. I do want to do more worst to best rankings throughout the year. There's going to be more to come. You could even request them. But again, look at my Patreon. You can have a look there and maybe get involved in that. That would be fantastic. Subscribe though, that would be even better. I just want people to stick around, watch my videos. That is all I ever want. Thank you for watching. Have a good day. Subscribe. Goodbye. Bye. Bye.